The hum of the lone fluorescent bulb above the gas station flickered and buzzed, casting an uneven pool of light onto the cracked asphalt. The wind carried the faint smell of gasoline and motor oil, mingling with the distant roar of engines that seemed to grow louder by the second. A solitary figure, clad in a weathered leather jacket, stepped out of his car and into the dim glow. He moved with a calmness that seemed almost misplaced in the eerie stillness of the night. He leaned against the hood of his car, the creak of the metal cutting through the silence. For a moment, he simply stood there, scanning the rows of pumps and the shadowy outlines of motorcycles parked near the side of the building. His expression gave away nothing, but his posture was deliberate, his movements controlled. The engines roared closer now, the sound reverberating through the empty parking lot. A group of bikers emerged from the darkness, their headlights piercing the gloom. One by one, they pulled up to the pumps, their boots crunching against the gravel as they dismounted. There were at least a dozen of them, each more imposing than the last. The leader was the first to approach. He was a towering man with a thick beard and a jacket patched with insignias that spoke of rank and history. His presence alone seemed to command respect or fear. His steel-toed boots echoed ominously as he walked toward the lone man by the car. "You lost, buddy?" the leader asked, his voice low but carrying an edge that brooked no nonsense. The man didn't flinch. He straightened from the car, his eyes locking onto the leader's. "Just passing through," he said evenly, his voice calm and measured. The leader chuckled darkly, a sound echoed by a few of the others. "Passing through, huh? Funny place to stop. This station doesn't get a lot of visitors." The man shrugged, his hands resting loosely at his sides. "Needed gas?" The leader's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer, his gang forming a loose semicircle around them. "This is our turf," he said. "Nobody stops here without our say-so." The tension in the air was palpable now, the kind that made even the night seem to hold its breath. The bikers were watching closely, their hands twitching near weapons tucked into their belts. The man, however, remained unnervingly calm, his gaze steady and unyielding. "I'll be on my way soon," he said simply, turning toward the pump. But the leader wasn't done. He reached out, grabbing the man's shoulder. The movement was quick, almost instinctive, but what happened next was faster. The man's hand shot up, effortlessly breaking the leader's grip. The bikers froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. "I wouldn't do that again," the man said, his tone still calm but carrying a warning that sent a ripple through the group. The leader's face hardened, his pride clearly wounded. He took a step back, signaling to his gang. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded, his voice rising. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his car, opening the door and reaching inside. The bikers tensed, their hands darting to their weapons. But when the man turned back around, he was holding nothing more than a wallet. "Just paying for my gas," he said, holding up a few bills. The leader's eyes flickered with suspicion. "That's an awful lot of attitude for someone who claims to just be passing through." The man didn't respond. He walked past the leader, placing the money on the counter by the pump before turning back to his car. The leader and his gang watched him closely, their unease growing with each passing second. "Wait a minute," the leader called out, his voice cutting through the night. The man paused, his hand resting on the car door. "You think you can just waltz in here, act like you own the place, and leave? Not without answering a few questions?" The man sighed, his hand dropping from the door. He turned back to face the group, his eyes scanning the bikers as if sizing them up. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his tone even but firm. The leader smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Trouble's already here, buddy. Now the only question is whether you're smart enough to walk away from it." The bikers closed in, their semicircle tightening. The leader took another step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife at his belt. "You've got a mouth on you," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "But out here, that won't get you far." The man's gaze didn't waver. If he was intimidated, he didn't show it. Instead, he took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the leader. "You've made your point," he said. "I'll be on my way." But as he moved to step past the leader, another biker blocked his path. The man stopped, his eyes flicking between the leader and the gang. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, the leader lunged, his knife flashing in the dim light. The man moved like lightning, his hand shooting up to catch the leader's wrist mid-strike. The knife hovered inches from his chest as the two men locked eyes. "Big mistake," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. With a swift twist of his wrist, he disarmed the leader, sending the knife clattering to the ground. The bikers surged forward, but the man was already moving, his movements precise and controlled. In a matter of seconds, he had incapacitated two of them, their groans of pain echoing through the night. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence shaken. The leader scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. The man didn't answer. He picked up the knife, tossing it toward the leader's feet. "Walk away," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. But the leader wasn't ready to back down. "You think you can come here, take us on, and just leave?" he spat. The man tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You don't want to find out what happens if I stay." The leader stared at him, his fists clenched. But something in the man's gaze, a cold, unyielding intensity, made him pause. Finally, he gave a sharp nod, signaling to his gang. One by one, the bikers retreated, their glares promising retribution. The man watched them go, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Only when the last of them had disappeared into the night did he turn back to his car. He opened the door, sliding into the driver's seat. As he started the engine, he glanced at the gas station one last time. The wind carried the faint echo of the bikers' engines, fading into the distance. For now, the night was quiet again. But the man knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. As the man drove away from the gas station, the rhythmic hum of the car's engine filled the cabin. The dark road stretched ahead, bordered by dense trees that swayed in the cool night breeze. His mind was calm, though the encounter replayed in fragments. He had dealt with worse before, far worse, but something about those bikers unsettled him. They weren't just a ragtag group looking for trouble. Their patches and insignias spoke of a hierarchy, a brotherhood that carried weight in circles most people wouldn't dare to tread. He recognized the emblems sewn into the back of their jackets, a red skull flanked by crossed wrenches. It wasn't just decorative. It was the mark of the Iron Fangs, a notorious motorcycle club with a reputation for ruthlessness. But they didn't recognize him. At least not yet. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as the headlights illuminated the winding road. He had hoped to leave that life behind, to disappear into the mundane anonymity of small towns and open highways. But trouble had a way of finding him, no matter how far he ran. The miles ticked by, the quiet solitude of the drive lulling him into a false sense of security. That was until the faint glimmer of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was just another late-night traveler, but the lights didn't waver or pass. They stayed locked onto him, gaining ground with deliberate intent. He tightened his grip on the wheel, his eyes flicking to the mirror as the vehicle grew closer. It wasn't just one bike, it was several. The low rumble of their engines cut through the silence, a sinister chorus that made his chest tighten. He exhaled slowly, pulling the car onto the shoulder of the road. There was no use in running, they'd catch up eventually. He turned off the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel as he faced the approaching gang. The bikers came into view, their silhouettes imposing against the glare of their headlights. They formed a loose semicircle around him, their engines still growling as they dismounted. The leader was at the forefront, his eyes glinting with barely restrained fury. "You didn't think we'd let you walk away that easily, did you?" the leader snarled, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. The man crossed his arms, his expression unchanging. "I gave you a chance to leave. You didn't take it?" The leader laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that sent a shiver through the air. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But out here, guts don't mean a damn thing without backup." The man's gaze swept over the group, noting their tense postures and clenched fists. They were waiting for a signal, a command to strike. He had seconds to decide his next move. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable warning. The leader smirked, pulling a chain from his belt and letting it dangle ominously. "Oh, I'm sure." Before the man could respond, the leader swung the chain, aiming for his head. But the man was already moving, ducking under the arc and closing the distance between them. He grabbed the leader's wrist, twisting it sharply and forcing him to drop the weapon. Chaos erupted. The bikers lunged at him, their attacks wild and frenzied. But the man moved with a precision that belied his seemingly unassuming demeanor. He sidestepped a punch, using his attacker's momentum to send him sprawling into another biker. A third came at him with a knife, but the man disarmed him with a swift strike to the wrist, the blade clattering to the ground. One by one, they fell, their aggression no match for his skill. The fight was over in minutes, the bikers groaning on the ground as the man stood over them, unscathed. The leader struggled to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. The man didn't answer. Instead, he walked back to his car, his movements deliberate. He opened the trunk, pulling out a small, unassuming duffel bag. The bikers watched warily as he unzipped it, revealing a collection of tools and items that hinted at a past he had tried to bury. Among them was a badge. The leader's eyes widened as recognition dawned. The man cut him off, his voice low but firm. "Go home. This is your last warning." The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of the man's presence. Finally, he nodded, signaling to his gang. They staggered to their feet, retreating to their bikes with muttered curses. As the roar of their engines faded into the distance, the man stood alone on the roadside, his badge glinting faintly in the moonlight. He stared at it for a long moment before tucking it back into the duffel bag and closing the trunk. He didn't need the reminder of who he was, or what he had been. But he also knew that this wasn't the end. The Iron Fangs wouldn't let this go. And when they came for him, they'd be walking into a fight they couldn't win. The man climbed back into his car and started the engine, his eyes scanning the empty road ahead. He knew he had only bought himself a brief reprieve. The Iron Fangs wouldn't forget the humiliation they'd suffered tonight. They were the kind of people who thrived on fear and power, and when someone disrupted that balance, retaliation was inevitable. He drove in silence, the faint hum of the tires on asphalt a steady rhythm that gave him a moment to think. Memories surfaced, unbidden and sharp, of a life he had tried to leave behind. Back then, he had been someone else entirely, a name whispered in the underworld, feared even by the worst of the worst. That life had cost him everything: friends, family, and any chance at peace. The badge in his duffel bag was a relic of that past, a symbol of his attempt to turn things around. He had worked undercover for years, infiltrating some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. It had been a grueling, thankless job, but he had been good at it, too good. When his cover was blown, it nearly cost him his life. That was when he disappeared, cutting ties with everyone he had ever known. And yet, here he was again, dragged back into the shadows he had tried so hard to escape. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint glow of headlights in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another car passing by, but the lights didn't waver. They stayed fixed on him, drawing closer with a predatory intensity. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his heart rate steady but his senses on high alert. He glanced at the rearview mirror. It wasn't just one vehicle, it was a convoy. The Iron Fangs had regrouped, and this time, they had brought reinforcements. Persistent, he muttered under his breath. The convoy gained on him quickly, their roaring engines a deafening symphony of aggression. They flanked him on both sides, their headlights casting long shadows across the road. The leader of the pack pulled up alongside his car, glaring at him through the window before signaling for him to pull over. The man didn't comply. Instead, he pressed his foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring as his car surged forward. The bikers gave chase, their headlights dancing in the darkness like predatory eyes. They weaved and swerved, trying to force him off the road, but he held his ground, his focus unyielding. Ahead, the road curved sharply, bordered by a steep drop on one side and a rocky embankment on the other. The bikers saw it as an opportunity, moving to box him in and cut off his escape. But the man had other plans. As the lead biker closed in, he yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, forcing his car into a controlled skid. The sudden movement caught the bikers off guard, and the lead rider swerved to avoid a collision, losing control and skidding into the embankment. The others faltered, their formation breaking as chaos rippled through their ranks. The man used the opportunity to gain some distance, his car tearing down the road like a bullet. But the reprieve was short-lived. The remaining bikers regrouped, their determination burning brighter than ever. One of them pulled a gun, firing a warning shot that shattered the rear window of the car. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for a lever beneath the dashboard, activating a hidden compartment that slid open to reveal an arsenal of tools and gadgets. Among them was a set of makeshift road spikes, small but effective. With a flick of a switch, he deployed them, the spikes scattering across the road behind him. The bikers didn't see them in time. Tires burst with loud pops, and bikes careened wildly, their riders thrown into disarray. A few managed to avoid the trap, but the damage had been done. The convoy was reduced to half its original size, their pursuit faltering as they struggled to recover. The man knew he couldn't keep this up forever. The Iron Fangs were relentless, and he was just one man against an entire organization. He needed a plan, something decisive that would put an end to this once and for all. He spotted a turnoff ahead, a narrow dirt road that disappeared into the woods. Without hesitation, he veered onto it, his car bouncing over the uneven terrain as he plunged into the darkness. The bikers followed, their headlights casting eerie shadows through the trees. The dirt road led to an abandoned quarry, its jagged cliffs rising like sentinels against the night sky. The man brought his car to a stop near the edge, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. He stepped out, his silhouette stark against the moonlit landscape. The bikers arrived moments later, their engines growling as they formed a semicircle around him. Their leader dismounted, his face twisted with rage. His earlier humiliation had been replaced by a burning desire for revenge. "You've got nowhere to run now," the leader sneered, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "This ends here." The man didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small, unassuming device. He held it up for them to see, the faint red light on its surface blinking ominously. "What the hell is that?" one of the bikers demanded, his voice tinged with unease. The man's gaze was steely, his voice calm. "You'll find out if you don't leave." The leader laughed, though it was forced. "You think you can scare us with a toy? We're not falling for your games." The man pressed a button on the device, and a distant rumble echoed through the quarry. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, a subtle but unmistakable warning. "This quarry is laced with old explosives," the man said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You make one wrong move and we all go up in flames." The bikers hesitated, their bravado faltering as the reality of the situation sank in. The leader's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of a bluff, but the man's expression was unreadable. "Call it off," the man said, his voice low but commanding. "Walk away while you still can." The leader clenched his fists, torn between his pride and the looming threat. Finally, he spat on the ground and signaled to his gang. One by one, the bikers retreated, their engines roaring as they disappeared into the night. The man watched them go, his shoulders relaxing slightly as the tension ebbed away. He deactivated the device, the blinking light fading into darkness. The explosives had been a bluff, but they didn't need to know that. For now, the fight was over. But he knew it wasn't the end. The Iron Fangs would be back, and when they came, he'd be ready. The moon hung high in the sky as the man leaned against the hood of his car, staring out over the empty quarry. The faint sound of crickets filled the air, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just moments ago. He took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from his body. But even as the night seemed to settle, his mind raced with the inevitability of what was to come. He couldn't stay here. The Iron Fangs might have retreated for now, but their return was guaranteed, and next time, they'd come in greater numbers and with deadlier intentions. His mind ticked through his options like clockwork, searching for a safe haven or a means to turn the tide in his favor. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint vibration of his phone. Pulling it from his pocket, he glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but he had a feeling he knew who it was. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." The voice on the other end was familiar, rough but calm. "You really know how to make enemies, don't you?" The man exhaled slowly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hello to you too, Sam." Sam was one of the few people from his past who hadn't abandoned him. A former intelligence operative turned independent contractor, Sam had been his go-to for intel and backup during his undercover days. If anyone could help him now, it was Sam. "I heard about the Iron Fangs," Sam continued. "Word travels fast in their circles. They're calling for reinforcements." "This isn't over." "I know," the man replied. "That's why I need your help." Sam chuckled. "You always did know how to drag me into your messes. What do you need?" "Everything you've got on the Iron Fangs. Their leadership, their operations, their weak points. If I'm going to survive this, I need to hit them where it hurts." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low whistle. "You're planning to take the fight to them? That's bold, even for you." "I don't have a choice," the man said, his voice firm. "They won't stop until they've made an example of me. If I don't act now, I'll be running for the rest of my life." Sam sighed. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But you'd better have a plan, because once you start this, there's no turning back." "I always have a plan," the man replied, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. His plans were often improvised, born out of necessity rather than careful strategy. But Sam didn't need to know that. "Give me a few hours," Sam said. "I'll send you what I find. In the meantime, stay out of sight. They've got eyes everywhere." "Thanks, Sam." "Don't thank me yet. You still owe me a drink for the last time I bailed you out." The call ended, and the man pocketed his phone. He glanced around the quarry, the silence pressing in once more. It was a temporary refuge, but it wouldn't hold for long. He needed to move. Climbing back into his car, he started the engine and navigated the winding dirt road back to the main highway. His destination was unclear, but his purpose was sharp and focused. The Iron Fangs had made a mistake when they decided to come after him, and he intended to make them regret it. Hours later, the man found himself in a rundown motel on the outskirts of a small town. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was a place to rest and regroup. He sat at the small desk in his room, the duffel bag open beside him. The badge he had once carried as an undercover agent caught the dim light, a reminder of the life he had left behind. Next to it was a battered notebook filled with names, dates, and locations, scraps of information he had gathered during his years in the field. As he flipped through the pages, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Sam, and it contained a file with detailed information on the Iron Fangs. The man opened it, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang, they were an empire. Their operations spanned multiple states, encompassing everything from drug trafficking to weapons smuggling. At the top of the chain was a man known only as Viper, a ruthless leader who had built the gang into a formidable force. Taking him down would be the key to dismantling the organization. The file also included details on their known hideouts, supply routes, and key players. It was a treasure trove of information, but it also highlighted the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute force alone. He needed to be smart, strategic, and unrelenting. The man leaned back in his chair, his mind piecing together a plan. He would start by cutting off their resources, disrupting their supply lines, and forcing them to spread themselves thin. Then he would target their leadership, taking them out one by one until Viper had no choice but to confront him directly. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only way. He had spent years operating in the shadows, dismantling criminal networks from within. This time, he would do it from the outside. As dawn broke, the man packed his things and checked out of the motel. The road ahead was long and treacherous, but he was ready. The Iron Fangs had declared war, and he intended to finish it on his terms. The morning air was crisp, the sun climbing lazily over the horizon as the man drove down a deserted highway. His mind replayed the details of Sam's file like a mantra. Supply routes, safe houses, allies, enemies. Each piece of intel was a stepping stone on the path to dismantling the Iron Fangs, one calculated move at a time. His first target was a warehouse just outside the city. According to Sam's file, it was a critical hub for the gang's weapons distribution. Without it, their ability to arm themselves would take a massive hit. But the warehouse wasn't just a stockpile, it was a fortress. Breaking in wouldn't be easy. He parked his car a few miles away and approached on foot, blending into the shadows as the city began to wake. From his vantage point across the street, he surveyed the warehouse. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire. Guards patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their movements methodical but predictable. Cameras covered every angle, and a single access gate allowed vehicles in and out. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk. It was secure, but not impenetrable. Hours later, night fell, cloaking the city in darkness. The man moved swiftly, his steps silent as he slipped through an alley behind the warehouse. He carried a small backpack filled with tools, a crowbar, bolt cutters, a few smoke grenades, and his trusted sidearm. He approached the fence, his heart steady as he worked the bolt cutters through the links. The metal groaned faintly, but the sound was lost in the hum of distant traffic. Within moments, he slipped through the opening and crouched low, scanning the area. The guards were still on their route, their flashlights slicing through the dark. Timing was everything. He waited until one pair of guards rounded the far corner of the building before making his move. Hugging the shadows, he crept along the side of the warehouse, avoiding the camera's line of sight. He reached a service door, locked with a heavy padlock. The crowbar made quick work of it, and he slipped inside. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, rows of crates stacked high and stretching deep into the space. The air smelled of oil and metal, the faint hum of machinery echoing through the cavernous room. He pulled a flashlight from his backpack, its beam cutting through the gloom as he searched for his target. Sam's file had been clear. This warehouse stored a shipment of high-caliber weapons set to be delivered to one of the Iron Fang's most dangerous factions. If he could destroy the shipment, it would send a message the gang wouldn't ignore. He found the crates near the center of the warehouse, their markings confirming their contents. Setting the flashlight aside, he retrieved a bundle of explosives from his bag. It wasn't a large amount, just enough to render the weapons useless and make a statement. As he worked, his ears remained attuned to the faint sounds of the guards outside. Any misstep could mean the end. The last charge was in place when he heard it, the unmistakable creak of the service door. His heart quickened, but his movements remained calm and precise as he concealed himself behind a stack of crates. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse, steady and deliberate. They weren't random. Someone was searching for him. He drew his sidearm, his grip firm as he peered around the edge of the crate. A single guard, flashlight in hand, moved cautiously down the aisle. The man waited, his breath even as the guard drew closer. When the guard passed his hiding spot, the man struck swiftly, disarming him and pulling him into a chokehold. The guard struggled briefly before going limp, unconscious. The man dragged the guard out of sight and checked his watch. Time was running out. He activated the timer on the explosives and slipped back out the way he came, leaving the guard behind. By the time he reached the fence, the first explosion lit up the night sky. The ground shook beneath him as a chain reaction tore through the warehouse, flames consuming everything inside. Alarms blared, and the remaining guards scrambled in confusion, their shouts drowned out by the roar of the fire. The man didn't look back as he disappeared into the night, his pulse steady and his mind already on the next step. The Iron Fangs wouldn't take this lightly. Within hours, word would spread, and retaliation would be swift. But that was part of the plan. By striking a decisive blow, he had forced them to react, to reveal their hand. And when they did, he would be ready. The man drove through the night, his destination another of the gang's operations, a drug lab hidden in an industrial complex on the outskirts of town. Like the warehouse, it was a vital cog in the Iron Fang's machine. Without it, their cash flow would take a significant hit. But this time, he wouldn't rely on explosives alone. He needed to gather intel, to uncover the gang's deeper connections and expose the web of corruption that allowed them to thrive. The drug lab was more than just a target, it was an opportunity. As dawn broke, the man parked his car a safe distance from the industrial complex and began his reconnaissance. The lab was well hidden, its nondescript exterior blending seamlessly with the other buildings in the area. But the signs were there, the steady stream of unmarked vans, the heavily armed guards stationed at the entrances, the faint chemical smell that lingered in the air. He spent the day observing, mapping the guards' movements and noting the shifts in their patrols. By the time night fell, he had a plan. Under the cover of darkness, the man moved towards the industrial complex with a precision that spoke of years of experience. His plan was twofold: dismantle the drug lab's operations and extract any critical intel hidden within. The building's exterior was lined with rusted metal panels, illuminated by a few flickering floodlights. He kept to the shadows, his movements fluid as he approached a side entrance. A keypad-controlled lock barred his way, but he was prepared. From his pocket, he retrieved a small device that emitted a faint, high-pitched hum. After a few seconds of fiddling with the wires behind the panel, the lock released with a faint click. He slipped inside, greeted by a dimly lit corridor with peeling paint and the acrid smell of chemicals. The faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance, guiding him toward the heart of the operation. Every step was calculated, his senses on high alert. He had no illusions. This was enemy territory, and he wouldn't be walking out if he made a mistake. The corridor opened into a sprawling room where the lab came into full view. Tables lined with glass beakers, burners, and containers of suspicious powders dominated the space. Workers in lab coats moved methodically, unaware of the intruder among them. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their postures rigid and their eyes scanning for threats. The man's gaze swept the room, locking onto a door marked office. If there was valuable intel, it would be there. But reaching it meant crossing a room teeming with potential hostiles. He adjusted his backpack and retrieved a small device, a handheld EMP generator. It wouldn't last long, but it would plunge the lab into darkness for just enough time to cause chaos. He activated the device, tossing it toward the center of the room before retreating to the shadows. A sharp crackle filled the air, and the lights flickered before plunging the room into darkness. Shouts erupted as workers scrambled, knocking over equipment in their confusion. Guards barked orders, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. The man used the commotion to slip through the chaos, weaving between workstations and slipping into the office unnoticed. Inside, the office was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Neatly organized shelves lined the walls, and a desk in the center was cluttered with papers and a laptop. He locked the door behind him and got to work, rifling through files and snapping pictures of documents with his phone. Shipment logs, financial records, contact lists, every piece of intel was a puzzle piece, a step closer to dismantling the Iron Fangs entirely. The laptop proved trickier. It was password protected, and he didn't have time to crack it on site. Instead, he pulled a USB drive from his pocket, inserting it into the laptop to clone its contents. As the drive worked, he turned his attention to a wall-mounted safe. It was small but sturdy, likely containing the most sensitive materials. He retrieved a compact electronic stethoscope from his bag, placing it against the safe's surface as he began to rotate the dial. His fingers moved with practiced ease, listening for the faint clicks that signaled the correct combination. It took longer than he anticipated, every second feeling like an eternity, but eventually, the safe door swung open. Inside were bundles of cash, a handgun, and a file folder marked with the Iron Fangs emblem. He ignored the cash and weapon, focusing instead on the folder. Flipping through its contents, he found blueprints of a compound, a roster of names, and a map marking several locations across the city. His lips tightened. This wasn't just about drugs or weapons. This was a network, and he was only scratching the surface. The USB drive beeped, signaling it was done. He grabbed it and the folder, slipping both into his backpack just as the chaos outside began to subside. The guards were regaining control, and it wouldn't be long before they started a thorough search. He unlocked the office door and slipped back into the shadows, retracing his steps toward the exit. The lab was still in disarray, but the guards were more alert now, their flashlights sweeping every corner. Timing his movements with precision, he reached the side door and slipped out into the night. By the time the man returned to his safe house, the sun was beginning to rise. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he couldn't afford to rest yet. He spread the stolen documents across the table, his gaze scanning each page for patterns, connections, anything that would give him an edge. The map was the most concerning. The marked locations weren't just random, they were strategic points across the city, tied to supply chains, recruitment hubs, and safe houses. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang, they were a fully operational syndicate with resources and reach that extended far beyond what he had initially anticipated. And at the center of it all was a name, Victor Kane. The man leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling over him. Kane wasn't just a leader, he was the architect of the Iron Fangs empire. Taking him down would be the final blow, but it wouldn't be easy. Kane was surrounded by loyalists, heavily protected, and likely aware that someone was targeting his organization. But the man wasn't deterred. He had come too far to back down now. In the days that followed, the man continued his campaign against the Iron Fangs, dismantling their operations piece by piece. Each strike brought him closer to Kane, forcing the gang to consolidate and tighten their defenses. He became a ghost in their system, a relentless force that they couldn't predict or contain. The city began to feel the ripple effects. Crime rates dropped as the gang's grip weakened, and whispers of a lone vigilante spread through the streets. But for the man, it wasn't about recognition or gratitude. It was about justice. It was about making sure no one else suffered at the hands of the Iron Fangs. The city was quiet as the man approached the Iron Fangs' final stronghold. The gang's leadership had retreated to an isolated compound on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling estate surrounded by tall fences, armed guards, and surveillance cameras. The man had spent days preparing for this moment, studying blueprints, observing patrol routes, and gathering the necessary equipment. This was the endgame, and there was no room for error. Dressed in all black, he crouched in the shadows of the forest that bordered the compound. His backpack was packed with tools, explosives, and enough ammunition to hold his ground if things went south. His objective was clear: eliminate Victor Kane and dismantle the Iron Fangs once and for all. The first obstacle was the perimeter fence, lined with motion sensors and barbed wire. He waited until the guards passed, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, then darted forward. With a pair of insulated wire cutters, he snipped through the fence and slipped inside. The patrols were frequent, but he had memorized their patterns. Every movement was calculated, every step precise. He reached the outer buildings, warehouses used for storing weapons and drugs. Setting small charges at key points, he moved on. These would serve as a distraction later, drawing attention away from the main estate. The compound itself was a fortress, its walls lined with cameras and guard towers. He scaled a section of the wall hidden by thick ivy, using a grappling hook to pull himself over. Dropping silently onto the other side, he found himself in a garden that stretched toward the main building. A pair of guards stood near the entrance, their rifles slung across their shoulders. The man crept closer, staying low behind a row of hedges. When the guards turned their backs, he struck. In a flash, he incapacitated them both, dragging their unconscious bodies into the shadows. He retrieved one of their radios, tuning into the gang's frequency to stay updated on their movements. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was tense. The gang knew they were under attack. They just didn't know how close their hunter had come. The man navigated the hallways with practiced ease, his silenced pistol at the ready. Each room he passed revealed more about the Iron Fangs operation: stacks of cash, crates of weapons, and walls plastered with maps and plans. This wasn't just a gang, it was a criminal empire. He reached the central staircase leading to Victor Kane's office. The door at the top was heavily guarded, with 4 men stationed outside. The man paused, considering his options. A direct assault would draw too much attention, but he couldn't afford to waste time. Retrieving a smoke grenade from his pack, he pulled the pin and rolled it toward the guards. The grenade hissed, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. Shouts erupted as the guards fumbled for their weapons, their vision obscured. The man moved swiftly, taking them down one by one in the chaos. When the smoke cleared, the hallway was silent. He pushed open the door to Kane's office. The room was lavish, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the compound below. Victor Kane stood behind a massive desk, a smug grin on his face. He was flanked by 2 enforcers, their hands resting on their holstered guns. "So, you're the one causing all this trouble," Cain said, his voice calm and measured. "I've got to admit, you've been a thorn in my side. But this ends here." The man didn't respond. Instead, he raised his pistol, his eyes locked on Cain. The enforcers moved to draw their weapons, but he was faster. 2 shots rang out, and the enforcers dropped to the floor. Cain didn't flinch. Instead, he laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You think killing me will change anything? The Iron Fangs are bigger than me. Bigger than you. You're just a man. And you're just a name," the man replied, his voice low. "One I intend to erase." Cain lunged for a gun hidden beneath his desk, but the man was ready. A single shot stopped him in his tracks, and the crime lord collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the compound systems. The man stepped over Cain's body, retrieving a flash drive from the desk. It contained the gang's most sensitive information, accounts, contacts, and records that could bring the entire organization to its knees. But he wasn't done yet. Retracing his steps, he planted the remaining explosives throughout the estate. As he exited the compound, he detonated the charges, the explosions lighting up the night sky. The warehouses went up in flames, and the estate crumbled as fire engulfed it. The Iron Fang's empire was no more. The aftermath was swift. The intel on the flash drive was handed over to law enforcement, leading to a wave of arrests and the dismantling of the gang's remaining operations. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, its streets finally free from the Iron Fang's grip. But the man didn't stick around to see the fallout. His mission was complete, but his work wasn't done. There were always more threats, more shadows to confront. He disappeared as quietly as he had arrived, a ghost once more. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread about the vigilante who had taken down the Iron Fangs. Some called him a hero, others a myth. But for those who had seen him in action, there was no doubt. He was a force to be reckoned with. And somewhere, in another city plagued by darkness, he was already preparing for his next fight.